bumpy path ahead. The Republican plan to repeal and replace Obamacare may run into some roadblocks as it moves to the Senate. Executive order aftermath. The mixed reaction following President Trump's order on religious liberty. Dropping the Girl Scouts. Why one archdiocese is cutting ties with the popular youth organization. And counting down the days to Fatima. A report from Rome with Vatican correspondent Mary Shevlin. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, May 5th, 2017. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. The House bill to repeal and replace Obamacare could be in for a bumpy ride now that it heads to the Senate, but Majority Leader Mitch McConnell praises the bill as an important step. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi tells us what comes next. Jason?
Wyatt, the health care bill will likely face big changes here in the Senate if it survives at all. It's encouraging to pro-life Americans since it defunds Planned Parenthood for 1 year, but the Senate's version of the bill will need 51 votes to pass.
With liberty and justice for all.
Senators have their work cut out for them on health care.
Well, the Senate will write its own bill. I mean, that's the way it works, right? And so they'll pass theirs, we'll pass ours.
Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, the longest-serving Republican, says his colleagues will have to be practical. He says we must manage expectations and remain focused on the art of the doable as we move forward. The House bill guts Obamacare's tax penalties, replaces its subsidies with tax credits, and bans those credits from covering abortion. It also strips Planned Parenthood of federal Medicaid funds for 1 year. The Congressional Budget Office estimates the abortion provider would lose close to $400 million. And so the group is pushing out ads targeting a few Republicans up for re-election in 2018.
Call Senator Jeff Flake and ask him to protect women's health.
But a group that helps elect pro-life lawmakers says it'll be working with the Republicans who are in the crosshairs.
These are our friends in the pro-life movement, and we will stand by them. We will be certainly, in D.C. coming alongside them and talking to them in their offices, making sure they have everything that they need to support their own arguments. But more important than anything is that we'll be calling on their friends in their own states to communicate their appreciation for their pro-life vote.
Senate Republicans can only lose 2 GOP votes to pass the bill. Those 2 could be Maine's Susan Collins and Alaska's Lisa Murkowski. Both are opposed to defunding Planned Parenthood.
The Senate will only start to debate the bill after some procedural steps. It needs the Congressional Budget Office to weigh in on how the bill will impact Americans. Wyatt?
Jason, the White House says they expect the House's plan to be changed. What likely can we expect out of the Senate?
We've heard a few ideas. Senator John Thune of South Dakota is working on a plan to use the tax subsidies to help poor people. Ohio Republican Rob Portman says he wants to see the bill get rid of Medicaid cuts and include treatment for people with drug addictions.
Correspondent Jason Calvi reporting from Capitol Hill. Thanks, Jason. Bishop Frank DeWayne, the chairman of the U.S. Bishops' Committee on Domestic Justice and Human Development, is praising pro-life protections in the health care bill, but he's urging lawmakers not to forget the poor. He says, quote, vulnerable people must not be left in poor and worsening circumstances as Congress attempts to fix the current and impending problems with the Affordable Care Act. Joining us now is James Capretta, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Jim, we've heard Democrats say this bill takes away health care from millions of people, strips subsidies for the poor. What do you think about the bill, just in reading it, looking it over?
Well, I think structurally it goes basically in the right direction. It has major reforms of some big programs. The Medicaid program, which is badly in need of reform, would allow a lot more flexibility at the state level. It has tax credits for people that don't have employer coverage. It has a number of important pro-life provisions, as your reporting indicated. I think the big problem is the one the bishop indicated, which is I do think they've withdrawn too much support for people at the very low end of the wage scale and the income scale in terms of buying health insurance. And so too many people under this bill would go without health insurance, especially people with moderate incomes. So if I were the Republicans on the Hill, I'd be worried about that. I'd try to fix it before they make this final.
And like I said, the Senate may have the opportunity to do that. We heard both Republicans and Democrats celebrating yesterday. The Republicans on one end celebrating that they passed the bill through the House, but the Democrats celebrating because they think this is going to help them win in midterm elections. What do you think? Do you think that a repeal of Obamacare will hurt Republicans' chances in 2018?
Well, it depends on if they fix it. I do think the current bill probably does have some political problems for the Republicans next year. If this was all they were going to do and this was the final version and they ended up becoming law, yeah, I do think that they would have some problems, because I do think it would lead to too many people not having health insurance, and that is a big concern in the country. You can tell if there's unease about the bill out there in the country, it's really about the number of people who will lose health insurance. So Republicans have started the process. I don't think they should celebrate yet. They're really a long way from having a law, and they need to fix it before they get it to the president's desk. They need to make sure it covers more people.
We're seeing wins for the pro-life movement across the country, seemingly wins at the federal level. They've passed this bill, but at the state level, we're hearing, at least in the state of Iowa, they've passed a 20-week abortion ban. How do you feel about this ongoing debate in terms of health care and the wider debate?
Well, I do think one of the best things about the bill that passed the House yesterday is that it has a very strong prohibition on the use of the subsidies that are in the bill, the tax credits, for buying insurance that covers abortion. That's unlike Obamacare, where they didn't get that enacted. So that's a very important provision. Of course, the Planned Parenthood provision is very, very important as well. I do think there's a concern when it goes to the Senate whether those can be retained. And so a big issue will be, how do you make sure that pro-life aspect of the House bill is sustained even as they fix other problems? So you got a real delicate balance you got to figure out here.
James Capretta, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks for breaking it down for us.
Okay, thank you.
President Trump signs the $1 trillion spending bill to fund the government through September. It's the first piece of major legislation the president has signed. There's mixed reaction also to President Trump's executive order on religious liberty. The Christ Medicus Foundation says there is much more work to be done to protect the right of conscience and religious freedom in health care, but we are encouraged by the administration's beginning effort to address the issue. And former chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, Robert P. George, who is Catholic, says on Twitter, the religious liberty executive order is meaningless. No substantive protections for conscience, a betrayal. Ivanka and Jared won, we lost. The head of EWTN is expressing cautious optimism, calling the order a hopeful sign. Chairman of the board and CEO Michael Warsaw says EWTN attorneys are still assessing what it means for the network, which has waged a 5-year legal battle with the federal government over the contraceptive and abortion mandate. Mr. Warsaw says he's grateful President Trump is, quote, honoring an election campaign commitment to people of faith. You can read Michael Warsaw's entire article in the National Catholic Register by going to ncregister.com. A U.S. service member dies in Somalia during an operation against an al-Qaeda-linked organization. It's the first U.S. combat death in the country in more than 2 decades. 2 others were injured when they came under fire. U.S. troops are in Somalia to help ground forces fight groups affiliated with al-Qaeda, including al-Shabaab. A plan by Russia to establish de-escalation zones in Syria is set to go into effect at midnight, but it will be at least another month until the safe areas are established. The zones are supposed to bring relief for hundreds of thousands of Syrian civilians. Russia, Turkey, and Iran will be the enforcers, but other countries could participate. The areas will be closed to military aircraft from the U.S.-led coalition. The Vatican is releasing more details about the Holy Father's trip to Fatima next weekend. His visit will mark the 100th anniversary of the apparitions of the Virgin Mary in the Portuguese town. Vatican correspondent Mary Shovlin was at today's press conference. She joins us from Rome. Mary, what did you learn today?
First of all, Wyatt, they're calling this trip a pilgrimage versus a voyage or a trip as the Pope usually takes abroad. The Pope will go as a pilgrim. The motto of this Fatima weekend will be with Mary, a pilgrimage in hope and in peace. This is the first time we learned that Pope Francis will ever visit Portugal, the first time he will visit the famous Marian shrine. The highlight of the weekend, of course, will be the canonization of 2 of the 3 visionaries, Jacinta and Francisco Marto. The Holy Father doing that personally, doing this all in Portuguese. We learned the Holy Father, who is not a native Portuguese speaker, but wanted to do so for the local people.
Well, Mary, noting that canonization of Francisco and Jacinta, 2 of the shepherd children who Mary appeared to, tell us more about the miracle that led to that.
Why, this is one of the mysteries that's still surrounding this weekend's events. We don't know much except that he's a young boy from Brazil who is inexplicably cured of an illness. What we did learn in my speaking today with the Director of Communications of the Vatican Shrine, of the Fatima Shrine, that there will be a press conference with this family from Brazil, and we might even get to meet the young boy who was cured, whose miracle led to this wonderful canonization. So we'll know more on Thursday.
Well, Mary, can you give us an idea of the numbers of people who will be in Fatima for next weekend's events?
Oh, just briefly, Wyatt, they're expecting about 1 million people, and from all 5 continents, really. Mainly the largest groups will be from Italy, Spain, and Portugal. Among those will be 2,000 journalists like myself, but also 2,000 priests. We'll have 71 bishops, 8 cardinals. But I spoke to the Director of Communications of the Vatican Shrine, Wyatt, and she said for them, it's about a lot more than numbers.
We want everybody to come and to say welcome to everybody, because it's a great moment for us, but I think it's a great moment for the Church in general.
Wyatt, she also said that she would be curious, however, to see what the final count would be after the Holy Father's visit. Wyatt?
And I anticipate this will be a very special moment for all of the faithful who have that special devotion to Our Lady of Fatima. Mary Shevlin, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Wyatt.
EWTN will have complete coverage of the celebrations in Fatima, including an international rosary and candlelight procession with the Pope. That starts at 4:30 p.m. Eastern on Friday, May 12th. Visit our website for a full list of special programming, EWTN.com. Coming up, elections in France, why the future of the European Union may be at stake. Plus, the Archbishop of Kansas City tells us why the Archdiocese is cutting ties with the Girl Scouts.
Unámonos a nuestros hermanos de ese gran continente.
Praying for Christians in Africa. That's the Pope's intention for the month of May. The Holy Father says he's asking for reconciliation, justice, and peace. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Sunday's presidential election in France could have wider ramification. The future of the European Union is also at stake. French voters must choose between Emmanuel Macron, a centrist who supports the EU, and Marine Le Pen, who is considered far-right and is against the EU. Joining us now from Les Touvets in southeastern France is freelance journalist Hindro Munsterman, who's also Catholic. Hindro, how is the race shaping up right now? Who's leading in the polls?
Well, the most recent polls give a lead to Emmanuel Macron, the center candidate. Most of them give about 60-65% of the votes for him, and a third of the French people seem to be likely to vote for Marine Le Pen. But these votes can still change a lot, because many people still doubt about what to vote.
Well, as you know, violent protests, anger, and heckling have been all part of France's presidential election this year. What are the people concerned about?
The French citizens are lost in this election. They're completely lost. Traditionally, they voted left-wing or right-wing, and both sides are absent of the second tour. So there's a lot of incomprehension about who they are, about their own identity. They have to vote between an extreme right person who is also defending some extreme left ideas, Marine Le Pen, and another candidate, a central candidate, who is combining ideas from the left and the right. So many people are disturbed, and so left-wing and right-wing people are so disturbed that some of them, the most extreme parts, are protesting in a violent way. But this stays quite a minority. It's not all overall.
France has also experienced several terror attacks in the past several years. How is the issue of terrorism impacting the election?
Marine Le Pen is using these attacks a lot to get votes, to tell people, to French citizens, that she is going to be tough on the extremists, on the Muslim minority, on everything that has anything to do with terrorism. Emmanuel Macron is also saying that he's attacking terrorism, but he tries to make French people understand that the real issue is not how to struggle against them, how to fight against them, but how to prevent that those young people, many of them were born in France, how is it possible that they become an extremist and a terrorist? So he wants to do a lot for prevention. So they have two different ways of handling this issue.
Two very different ways. It's a very interesting and historic election there in France. We will be following it as well as you will. Journalist Hindro Munsterman from Les Touvets in southeastern France. Thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you very much.
The Archdiocese of Kansas City in Kansas severed ties with the Girl Scouts this week, saying the group is not compatible in shaping young women with the gospel values. Instead, the Archdiocese is switching to American Heritage Girls, a Christian-based scouting program. Joining us now is Archbishop Joseph Naumann of Kansas City, Kansas. Your Excellency, welcome to the program. Why do you believe the Girl Scouts do not promote Christian values?
Well, first of all, let me clarify that. They do promote some Christian values, some things that we have a joint emphasis on, but they lack in some very important areas, very critical areas. Part of it is their Journeys program that they developed in recent years, and some of the role models that they hold up for young people in that, like Margaret Sanger or Betty Friedan or Gloria Steinem. And this has been an ongoing dialogue that we've had with them. They've removed some materials, but those that they hold up for our young girls to imitate aren't the role models that we really think are the ones we'd like our young girls to imitate.
Well, as you say, you've been considering this decision for a while. In January, you called for an end to selling Girl Scout cookies at parishes after this school year. What kind of response have you been getting?
The reaction has been mixed. I think those that kind of understand our concerns have been very encouraging and supportive. Others, and I can understand this, there are a lot of good things historically about Girl Scouts, and many people just don't understand this. And they don't understand how the Girl Scout national leadership and international leadership has really moved away from us and from the values that we celebrate.
You're now partnering with American Heritage Girls, which describes itself as a Christ-centered leadership and character development ministry. Why do you think this is a better partnership than the Girl Scouts?
Well, with Girl Scouts, we were constantly having to monitor their materials to make sure that there weren't things that were contrary to our faith. So part of it was to move away from Girl Scouts, but it was to move to American Heritage Girls because they really are Christ-centered, and the role models, the program really fits much better with what we're trying to help our young women do, which is to develop a friendship with Jesus Christ, to embrace the gospel, and to love the church. And so we think at this point in time, American Heritage Girls is a much better fit. And we only have a limited time with our young people at our parishes. So we can't afford to have a program that has some things that are good, but some things that are bad.
Sure.
We think American Heritage Girls really fits much better what we're trying to form our young girls with.
Sure, Your Excellency, and I understand that you guys have been thinking about this for a long time, have been praying about this as well. Archbishop Joseph Naumann of Kansas City, Kansas, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thanks. God bless.
Tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, Catherine Zeltner profiles Dr. Bernard Nathanson, an abortionist who later became pro-life. Before he died in 2011, he met with pro-lifer Terry Beatley and described how he created propaganda to convince Americans to vote for pro-abortion politicians.
They would sell it like this: you can remain Mr. and Mrs. Catholic voter in New York, personally abhorrent to abortion, but it's okay to vote for a pro-choice candidate because it's just a personal decision between a woman and her doctor.
Dr. Nathanson would go on to become a Catholic convert before his death. You can see more of Catherine's interview tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. It airs at 11 p.m. Eastern and again Sunday morning at 10 Eastern. Up next, Congressman Francis Rooney.
Well, you know, you got to put rocks in the pond to fill it up. It takes a lot of rocks.
Part 2 of Lauren Ashburn's one-on-one conversation with the representative. And big honors for one Catholic for his lifelong advocacy for religious freedom.
Modo speciale per I rigidi.
During Mass this morning, the Holy Father says we need to pray for people living a double life, doing one thing in church and another in private. He invites everyone to follow in the footsteps of the Lord. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Pakistan has sentenced a Christian to life in prison for violating the country's blasphemy laws, even though the suspect denies the charges and claims there's no evidence. American Congressman Francis Rooney is calling for the end of blasphemy laws in the Muslim world. He talked to Lauren Ashburn about it.
Representative Francis Rooney of Florida, thank you so much for joining us.
Lauren, thank you for having me back on.
Today, you wrote about promoting religious freedom, including the values of free expression, as they will help undermine blasphemy laws, hoping to lead to their elimination. That's pretty bold, isn't it?
Well, you know, I got to thinking about that, and I did a talk to the Religious Freedom Institute, and I got to thinking about the old comment about Nostra Aetate that John Courtney Murray worked to get the clerics of old Europe to support Nostra Aetate and found some reluctance. So he went to the Eastern European clerics who said, you can't have religious freedom for some without having it for all. Then I got to thinking, well, how can we talk about countries with blasphemy laws as in any way supportive of freedom? So blasphemy laws, therefore, are a big impediment to promoting freedom, and religious freedom is a major contributor to promoting freedom and civility in life. Therefore, go after blasphemy laws.
I think people who have blasphemy laws aren't going to change anytime soon.
Well, we've got to hope that the entire concept of Islam changes over time, or we're not going to solve this Islamic terrorism problem. We need them to find a construction of Islam which is, as Pope Benedict said so well, aligned with 21st century values and codes of conduct.
Let's take a look at what happened with Egypt just last month. 2 churches were bombed. There are issues with Syria. We bombed Syria. It is such a monumental task. Where do you begin?
Well, you know, you got to put rocks in the pond to fill it up. It takes a lot of rocks, and I think that every voice needs to be heard. Both religious leaders, especially Islamic leaders, and maybe my hope is that as our religious leaders create opportunities for religious dialogue, their voices will become stronger and more empowered. But we've also got to couple it with calling out the elephant in the room, and Pope Benedict did that, and recently Pope Francis got pretty close to doing that himself. That this religiously referenced, if you will, inspired, referenced, using religion as a tool to commit murder and mayhem can't be tolerated in the modern world.
You mentioned in your Real Clear Politics op-ed that 30 Islamic religious leaders and scholars had sent a letter to Pope Benedict recognizing the need for Islam to reconcile with modernity. Did that do enough?
The history of humanity is that appeasement doesn't work. And we've tried appeasement. Europe tried appeasement when I was serving as ambassador, when they put their head down when the first Danish cartoons came up. And the Pope spoke out courageously at Regensburg and created some dialogue. Recently, the Jordan religious minister came out, and said you can't fight an idea. The Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia has spoken up about Islamically referenced terrorism. Those are good signs, but we need a lot more. There have been more and more op-eds in American newspapers by Muslims in America who are secular Muslims. We need those people to speak up.
And finally, you say about the Catholic Church in the 60s that that's almost a model for this, and that the Catholics, provided an opening for addressing the religious liberties of other religious organizations.
Right. Vatican II in Nostra Aetate and Dignitatis Humanae created a forum for accepting all religions and bringing open dialogue into among different religious beliefs, and I think we need a Nostra Aetate for Islam right now.
Thank you so much, Representative Francis Rooney from Florida.
Thanks for having me on.
Finally tonight, a prominent pro-life Catholic receives religious liberty's highest honor. Leonard Leo, Vice President of the Federalist Society, was awarded Beckett's 2017 Canterbury Medal for his lifelong advocacy for religious freedom in the U.S. and around the world. Leo has served on the Commission on International Religious Freedom and was a delegate to the UN Council on Human Rights. We congratulate him on this award. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We leave you tonight with a look at some of the people who make this program possible. Good night, and God bless.